555. We're on text at 81771. You can tweet at BBC Talkback. The leaders of Britain's biggest trade unions have today called on their 6 million members to vote to keep Britain in the EU when we go to the polls in less than 3 weeks' time. Unite, UNISON, the GMB and other unions say leaving the EU would allow the Tories freedom to dismantle workers' rights. But not every union agrees with them. On Friday, Northern Ireland's largest trade union, NIPSA, which represents some 46,000 public service workers here, urged its members to vote to leave the EU. We're debating the left-wing case for Brexit today on Talkback. Is the EU good for workers? Or if you care about workers' rights, should you be supporting Brexit? Text us 81771. Tell us quickly what you think of that question. Patrick Mulholland is a member of NIPSA's executive, their general counsel. He will be voting to leave the EU. Patricia McKeown is from the union UNISON. She will be voting to keep the UK in the EU. Welcome to both of you. Always good to see you in the studio. Hi, welcome. Why will you be voting for Brexit then, Patrick?
Well, I think, William, the case for leaving the EU is overwhelming from a trade union point of view. Can I just say, though, that we do not find ourselves in any sense standing on the same ground as the official Leave campaign, which is based on racism. It's based on further cuts. And
it's not all really based on you might say some people are racist on either side of that. I'm not going to get into that. But not everyone who is for Brexit is a racist.
Oh, that's absolutely true. But I'm talking about the broad campaign, and the platform that they are standing on is going in that direction. It's generally what their proposal is that they can't make enough cuts in the EU. They want to make more cuts outside the EU. So we don't stand on the same ground as them. We want to see a real democratic discussion taking place with ordinary people in this country. We want to see a democratic discussion within the trade unions, and we think out of the other end of that, we will have a much clearer picture for the future.
And what makes you think, if you got Brexit, that your ambition for a post-Brexit Britain will be the one that wins out, rather than the austerity ambition that you've already dismissed?
Well, we have two choices at the present time. We have austerity in the EU, or we have austerity outside the EU. What we are arguing is we should come outside of the EU, and what the union movement and people in this country should then be fighting for is a different type of an economy, in our view, a socialist economy that is based on the needs of the 99%.
Which will be run for the next 4 years by David Cameron and the Tory government.
Well, if we come out of the EU tomorrow, it's very unlikely that David Cameron would be in power within 2 or 3 weeks.
Boris Johnson.
Well, there's a question mark over that. Is it possible we could see a Corbyn government? And if we did see a Corbyn government, then we have very real issues presented by the EU. Corbyn has a programme that
when are you going to see a Corbyn government, Patrick? You've got 4 more years before a general election, when all the negotiations would have to happen.
Well, if counting on the EU vote, we may be looking at a general election in the very near future. That's a possibility. You could then see a Corbyn government coming in. And our point on this is, if Jeremy Corbyn was elected tomorrow, under current EU rules, his hands would be tied. He would not be able to do what he wants to do. He would face the same problems that the Greek people faced when they said no austerity and the EU forced austerity on them. We want to see a different option in front of people.
Patricia McKeown, does that sound like pie in the sky, or does that sound like good socialist politics?
Well, let's be honest, there's also the left-wing case for Remain. I want to say something. The big campaigns across the water that talk about Brexit in Britain are really very insulting to us. They forget about the fact that Northern Ireland is a part of the UK, and this is about the UK staying in Europe.
UK's it.
The almost 2,000 UNISON branches were consulted on this, and here in Northern Ireland we both consulted the branches and brought them together. Last month had a very detailed debate, and 3 things swung it in favour of Remain for our members. The first and big obvious one is workers' rights. The second was the human rights protections for the majority of the people, especially social and economic rights. And the third was our own peace process and where it would stand if we left Europe, given the fact that for 18 years, successive British governments of whatever colour have failed to deliver on a Bill of Rights for us.
Those were the 3 planks of your final decision?
Those were the 3 main planks. Obviously, people debated the kind of arguments that are out there at the minute. Would leaving the EU create an extra pot of money for the UK exchequer? And if so, did anybody really believe that governments which have taken billions out of the Northern Ireland Block grant over the last number of years were actually going to give us more money. And I have to say there was a healthy dose of scepticism there.
030 30 80 55 55. Patricia McKeown's just been speaking. We've already heard from Patrick Mulholland, and we're debating the left wing, the kind of socialist case for or against the European Union. We're taking your calls, we're taking your texts as well on 81771, and you can ask either of our guests questions. Grab your headphones there, guys, and we'll go straight to the calls. Ted is with us. Hello, Ted.
Good morning, William. Hello, William.
Sorry about that, Ted. Go ahead.
Hi. Well, I've been a trade unionist all my working life. I was a member of the British Labour Party before coming to live in Northern Ireland, and I'm very, very much in favour of Brexit. The reasons being that we talk about workers' rights. Well, the 1906 Workmen's Compensations Act was the first piece of legislation that was brought in this century for workers before the First World War. That didn't come from Europe. The minimum wage didn't come from Europe. You go to places like Germany, there's no minimum wage paid, especially in catering and hotel industries. Secondly, I feel that the greatest piece of legislation ever to benefit workers in this country, the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974, that didn't come from Europe either. I'm very concerned that sooner or later we'd have to join the euro. And we've all seen what that's done to working people in places like Greece and Spain. And I'm very, very concerned, and this hasn't featured in the debate, and I'd ask you two contributors to speak on this, TTIP, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Programme, which is being negotiated on our behalf, although most people know nothing about it. We haven't been consulted or our views sought in any way. It's being worked out between the European Union and the USA, which is going to devastate public services in this country, health services especially, which unionism represents almost all health work.
Ted, thank you very much. I'm going to take up both of your points. I'll put the first to Patricia. What has the EU given workers in terms of workers' rights that a British government, Patricia, hasn't given workers or wouldn't give workers outside of the EU?
Well, the first equal pay motion was passed by the TUC in 1888. In 1970, the UK government finally had to introduce legislation because it was signatory to the Treaty of Rome. Begrudgingly, it delayed the law for 10 years. Didn't do very much as it was constructed to help the lowest paid women workers. Unions like our own brought that case back to Europe and secured equal pay for equal value. It was back in the mid-80s that we launched our first cases in the health service to get hospital domestics on an equal status with men doing similar jobs.
What makes you think you wouldn't make more progress or enough progress or sufficient progress under an independent British government outside of the EU on those issues?
Well, let me think. 30 years of continuous attack on workers' and trade union rights, first of all by the Thatcher government, opportunity for the Labour government to reverse some of those bad decisions. That did not happen. Further major attack on workers' and trade union rights by the current government. That doesn't suggest that we're going to be able to protect people very quickly. We have faced privatisation since the mid-80s. We've fought it off very strongly here in Northern Ireland, but if it had not been for the Acquired Rights Directive, which forced the government to introduce TUPE protections, not just for public service workers, but for those many hundreds of thousands of private sector workers who found their companies in hostile takeovers, etc., they would not have jobs today.
Patrick,
yeah, just
on the same question.
Well, coming on a couple of points on it. I mean, first of all, on the issue of equal pay, I mean, one of the things that does have to be pointed out, we currently are in the European Union. It's almost as if it didn't exist. We're in the European Union, and women workers do not get equal pay in our country today. in the European Union, nor do they in any country in Europe. And any progress that has been made on equal pay has been through worker struggles. The famous Ford Dagenham strike, where the women workers took on the employers and took on the government in effect and forced a change in equal pay. That's how things were achieved, and there's a long way to go yet. So we still have that struggle to fight. The reality is, in the European Union, people do not get equal pay. Women are not treated equally. On the issue of, what a future government could or couldn't do, I think this is a very important point. The way that we see it is, there's the potential for a Corbyn government to come into power in the very near future. There's the potential for that government to make radical changes or propose radical changes, and the European Union would tie their hands.
Why are you so confident that there's going to be a general election?
Well, I'm not saying confidently.
Where's
I'm
this
saying
confidence
the potential,
about a Corbyn government?
I'm saying the potential is there, William. And the reality is this is the elephant in the room. If there was a Corbyn government or a radical government elected in Britain tomorrow, or in the next year, in the next 2 years, next 3 years, and we are within the European Union, we would find ourselves in exactly the same position as Greece when Greece said no to austerity and there was an economic coup in the country.
Jeremy Corbyn is your great hope.
No, I'm talking about
Jeremy Corbyn,
a radical
who is
government
campaigning to remain within the EU.
No, I'm talking about a radical government that would be prepared to take radical measures with the economy. If such a government was elected,
are you disappointed that Jeremy Corbyn is on the other side of this debate?
Well, I think Jeremy Corbyn probably finds himself in an interesting position where for many, many years Jeremy Corbyn would have been a supporter of leaving the European Union, but as the leader of the Labour Party, he has to represent that party's view, and he is now a Remain supporter.
You think he's abandoned his principles?
No, I think anybody who's the leader of the party has to put forward the position of the party, but I think it may be better if he was to openly say what his personal opinion was as well. I think that would be helpful.
We'll come back to TTIP in a minute. A lot of people want to talk about that. Let's go first to Dan. Hello, Dan.
Hello there. I'd like to say I'm delighted that our trade union movement has finally bit the bullet and supported Brexit, because it's lower pay workers that have faced the brunt of increased immigration, lower pay, and competition for jobs. But I would like to say to Patricia McKeown, I know you're not allowed to mention the Stephen word on your programme, but Stephen had a very good interview with Colm Eastwood, the SDLP man there, and he admitted that if we stay in Europe, we have to introduce water charges. So that's going to impact on the lowest paid workers. And also, the whole VAT system in the European Union needs to be reformed, because currently we have the lowest fuel poverty in the whole of the UK, but we can't zero rate the tax on oil because the European Union doesn't allow it.
Dan, thank you very much. On water charges, Patricia, would being in or out of the EU have any effect on that?
I think that's a decision for our own government. We've just elected them. That would be our local politicians. They've taken decisions in the past. We got to a stage there in negotiation with the trade union movement and a previous minister where we thought we were going to get a fair deal on water. We already pay for it. But we thought we were going to get a fair deal that would be, in particular, protecting the most vulnerable people in this society. But,
so as far as you're concerned, that's a red herring.
I think that's
an issue for Stormont, in or out.
So much of this is a red herring. The reason we are a low-pay economy is because we have our own government and we have employers here who take poor decisions in terms of workers' rights. And it is for the trade union movement to stand up against that. But what I am saying very, very clearly is a floor of rights in Europe is what makes the difference. Those women in Ford Dagenham had to wait for an equal pay law before they could move.
Question for Patrick from Brian.
Oh, hello, William. William, you know I've been on before 3 times, and I can never. I've given up on the word guarantee because I can't get any guarantees.
Well, there isn't one.
No, but I'll use a different word. I'd like to ask Patrick. Patrick, would you say that it is possible that there may be more interest rates going up and more unemployment if we pull out of Euro? Is it a possibility? Straightforward question.
Yeah.
Thanks very much. And we heard today from George Osborne suggesting that if Brexit wins, you'll have an increase in unemployment in Northern Ireland, house prices going up, big impact on pensions and the like. He's been describing his understanding of what would happen in Brexit. What's your understanding, Patrick?
Yeah, well, I think we should be very clear about this. I think, first of all, there are no such things as guarantees. Like taxes and death are the only things that are guaranteed. But the reality is, over the next period of time, whether we stay in or we leave the European Union, if we continue with the current economic climate and we continue with the current political parties in power, there will be an increase in unemployment. There will be an increase in poverty for working class people. These things are guaranteed either direction. If we don't leave and make a significant economic change, if all we do is leave the European Union and have a different set of Tories running the country, we're going to end up with the same scenario eventually. I mean, if I can touch just on the other issue that came up.
Well, this is a pretty big issue, isn't it, for a union?
Oh, it is a huge issue. Yeah,
the impact of what you're recommending on unemployment. Can you tell us why you believe that Brexit is not going to lead to a significant increase in unemployment?
No, I didn't say that Brexit wouldn't, William. What I am saying is, if we take either choice of remain or leave, with a Tory government at the helm and basically the economic structures that we currently have unchanged, we will end up with more poverty, more misery and more unemployment for people. What NIPSA is arguing is not just that we leave, but that we have to leave and we have to look at the economy differently. We have to do things differently. It's not just enough to leave. There are big things on the horizon.
But NIPSA doesn't run the economy.
Well, NIPSA doesn't run the economy, that's true, but we are fighting for a different economy. And if I can touch just on one of the big issues that one of your callers brought up there, the issue of TTIP. TTIP is a huge issue for all of us now. TTIP threatens every public service that exists in Northern Ireland. It threatens every job in Northern Ireland. It threatens massive poverty in Northern Ireland. Essentially what it is the privatisation and marketisation of all of our public services. And it takes democratic control of those services out of the hands of the people. That is coming through the European Union. That is actually coming fast and thick at us at the present time. And part of what we are voting on here is not just the European Union, but it's also TTIP. It can't be ignored. It's a massive issue.
TTIP, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. Incidentally, we've talked about it on the programme a number of times. Tony, you're live on air.
Hello, William.
Hi, Tony.
Hi. William, especially in relation to some of the callers have already touched on this issue of the claim that the EU acts as a check on the Tories, and even in some way that it is granted as various rights. You know, I mean, I'm sure that maybe the Patrick and both Patricia would be aware that the British government has opt-outs to many relatively progressive EU employment laws, such as the Working Time Directive, and other EU employment regulations as well, such as the Postal Workers Directive. There's a whole lot of items that the Tories have the opportunity of opting out of. And the other thing that Patricia mentioned as well, and again it goes to this point about who's responsible for achieving workers' rights. Is it the EU or is it basically workers' struggle? And the point is made there regarding equal rights for equal pay for women, which was a sort of a jewel, supposedly a jewel in the crown of the EU employment law. You know, this actually was won by, and it's already been touched on by Patrick, by mass strikes in France after World War II. French government were involved in demanding equal pay as well. So the point I'm making is that most of these laws and things which promoted workers' conditions were achieved from the bottom up, from trade union struggle from day one. The EU have shown by their behaviour, and particularly in relation to Greece and the Troika, in terms of what they were responsible for in the Republic, that they basically seem to be operating economic policy from without. They were dictating.
All right, Tony. Tony, I've got to break in, but thank you very much. We get your point. I think both people in the studio are agreeing with you that many of these reforms have been achieved from the bottom up, often through industrial action. Anne, welcome.
Hi, William. Yeah, I've been listening to a lot of these debates as well, and people keep going on about the European Union and how it's upholding rights for workers and stuff. Now, I don't know whether you know this or not, but workers in France have been rioting on the streets now for weeks over labour reforms, which means that French companies are allowed to take away workers' rights, sack people without due cause, sort out all sorts of holiday pay and ordinary pay changes and stuff like that. So, you know, what's the European Union doing about that? Another thing, all over the south of Europe, we have youth unemployment sitting at between 24 and 50%. That's not a good thing for those workers. And I'd also like to ask what the unions have been doing about the flood of migrant cheap labour into Northern Ireland market, pushing the wages down for ordinary, unskilled local people.
That's not acceptable. We're not dealing with a flood of unskilled, low-paid workers.
You mightn't be dealing with a flood, but ordinary unskilled people.
Patricia, you need to put those cans on, please. Thank you.
We're not actually. We're dealing with people who are coming in to pull us out of a terrible hole in places like the National Health Service.
Yeah.
You know,
what about the factories and everything else? Who did the jobs before the migrants came? We did.
Well,
and then we're forced to fight tooth and nail.
I have to.
Scummy craps off the table for low wages because the market has been flooded, and a lot of the employment agencies are advertising for workers in Poland, in Lithuania, and all those places where we don't even get to hear about.
Okay, and there's a lot of exploitation going on here, and that's something we're laying very much at the door of our own government. You and I just went out and elected them, and we're saying we've got to see protection for workers' rights, irrespective of where the workers come from. If you work in this place, you deserve fairness, you deserve decency, you deserve some proper treatment. Now, the floor of those rights was secured by the struggle of workers across Europe, and those rights in social Europe are things that the trade union movement has championed.
Patrick, what do you say? What do you say on this issue of migration?
Well, can I first of all touch on? I think there was a very good point raised by your caller there about what the EU is and isn't doing at the present time. Yeah. Workers' rights are getting a hammer in France. Workers' rights are getting a hammer here. Workers' rights are getting a hammer in Spain. Workers' rights are getting a hammer right across Europe. And the European Union is doing nothing to protect workers. In fact, the European Union is driving many of these issues. If you look at Greece, there's the reality. On the issue of immigration...
Do you care about workers' rights in Spain?
Oh, absolutely. These are our brothers and sisters in struggle. And
you're an internationalist.
Oh, yes. And
who
also
is supporting Brexit to break off that connection with those other workers.
What we want to see is international solidarity amongst workers across Europe. We want to say to other workers in other countries, let's link up, let's join together, and let's make sure we're not being exploited and one play it off against the other.
Why isn't the European Union a better approach to that internationalism in your mind?
Well, the European Union is a bosses' union. It's not a workers' union. The European Union is completely undemocratic. It is managed by a handful of commissioners who take the big decisions, and the European Parliament is allowed to rubber stamp those or question them, but they can't actually do anything. That's the reality of the European Union. On this issue of immigration...
Well, I've got to give Patricia a response to that. You've suggested that she is supporting, recommending a bosses' union.
Well, you see, I think that UNISON and NIPSA would be as of one as of the rest of the trade union movement on our analysis of the right-wing elite.
The democratic deficit within the European Union.
Big democratic deficit.
But do you see it as a bosses' union?
But it also has its other side, which is social Europe. Now, it's down to us to change. I don't think walking away is the solution.
Is it democratic?
It's not democratic in terms of the ability of the European Commission to ignore the will of the European Parliament, and we've seen that many times. We've seen it on some very important international issues. But it is down to us to try and reform that. It is down to the international trade union movement to stand together. And, you know, it is the international trade union movement across Europe and elsewhere
all right,
that is saying remain, and it is also Jeremy Corbyn who's saying remain.
He is saying remain. Let's go to Martin. Hello. Hi, Martin.
Hello there, William. How are you doing? Hi, William. I think the Remain campaign give us the daily diet of scaremongering. If it's not one thing, it's another. It's George Osborne today. It was John Major yesterday. It just seems to be an incessant supply of scare based on risk aversion. But let's deal with the knowns. And the knowns are, in Europe right now, there are about 5 countries that have been crucified by the EU. Yeah. The Republic of Ireland, Portugal, Spain, Greece. These countries now are actually living on borrowed time with regards to their economy. Yeah. And I was just coming back from Italy last week, and I was talking to a lady in Italy, and she was saying that young people now are nearly 50% unemployed. Now, the other knowns are, though, look at Switzerland and Norway. And the facts are, with regards to Switzerland and Norway, Switzerland particularly, they have free trade deals with the EU. They export 5 times more to the EU than the UK currently. They have highest wages in Europe. They're the second richest country in the world, and they rank first in the world in Global Innovation Index. So in terms of actually the facts that are being put out there, I think a lot of the things that Patricia was alluding to are based on pure red herrings, and in particular I want to refer to the human rights legislation, because that doesn't necessarily imply it's an EU concept, because the European Convention on Human Rights can apply to all countries, and it does apply to Switzerland and Norway, who are outside the EU as well.
Here's the difference, though, Martin. If you're in the European Union, you have to be signed up to the European Convention on Human Rights, don't you?
Totally, but you can still sign up to it.
Yes, but if we were to leave the European Union, we've got some people, very leading figures within the Tory party, who actually want to reconsider the Convention on Human Rights.
But we can challenge that through the House of Commons.
You could.
Yeah, so
but you don't even have the potential of losing
the
the convention if you stay within the European Union, do you?
But I think there's enough will in the British people to make sure that doesn't happen.
Are you sure?
Absolutely, because...
Can you guarantee that?
That's what democracy is all about. You put it to the vote and you get the people to decide. And if the Tories took away our human rights, I think there'll be a complete outcry with regards to people on the streets. And in fact, there's not enough angry people on the streets with regards to this.
But Tricia's not looking quite so persuaded on this, are you?
We did put it to the vote. It's called the Good Friday Agreement. The vast majority of people in Northern Ireland and across this island voted for it. They didn't vote for the EU. The promise was that we would build on the ECHR and we would have our Bill of Rights. Now, I'm sorry I haven't got your confidence in the House of Commons and successive governments. For 18 years, they've ignored the will of the people on that vote. And the very government that's there at the minute wants to dismantle significant parts of its own Human Rights Act, let alone, well, that's exactly what the trade union movement is doing. And that's what we're doing in Europe as well. We're challenging Europe. We're challenging that undemocratic, capitalist Europe, and we're saying it's social Europe we want.
Yeah, but Patricia, you're going to use an undemocratic system to challenge a democratic system. I would rather use a democratic system and challenge that democratic system than use something that's actually completely remote from reality.
I don't know where you're coming from. You can't get much more democratic than asking the entire population of Northern Ireland to vote on a peace agreement and then have 18 years of British governments refusing to implement it.
He's talking about the European Union's institutions, which he says are undemocratic.
Well, I think we find ourselves in the same position.
Thank you very much, Martin. Really good, interesting call. Thank you very much. Kieran.
Well, William, just on that point, I mean, the co-decision is taken by elected people, either through the European Parliament or with elected ministers. So I mean, there is no democratic deficit in that. So maybe not ideal, but it's certainly not democratic because the entire decision-making is taken by elected people. But certainly many, and back to the point about, is these rights guaranteed? Of course they're guaranteed. Many of the employment protections that we take for granted, like equal treatment for agency workers and part-time workers, paid holidays, these are all guaranteed by EU law. And we are going to risk putting this back to a Tory government. Can you actually guarantee that any Conservative government will keep these employment rights?
Patrick,
of course they can.
People keep referring to the Conservative government and what it will do and what it won't do. Well, people should remember the Conservative government are the people who are supporting the Remain campaign. They're the people driving the Remain campaign, and I have not. Let me be clear. I do not trust them as far as I could throw them. They would. Yeah, but they're the people you're relying on to look after your rights. I would be saying to people, do not trust the official Remain campaign. Do not trust the official Leave campaign. It's Tories on both. It's Tories on both sides. It's Tories on both sides of that. As far as the European Union is concerned, and it looking after people's rights, etc., ask the people of Syria how they're looking after their rights when they're standing on the other side of the Turkish border, having just been bucked out
Patrick,
of the European Union.
Is that what's going on in your mind? You're thinking, vote to leave the EU, because in that situation, we're more likely to have a general election. And in that situation, Jeremy Corbyn, who's supporting Remain, incidentally, is more likely to become, in your mind, more likely to become Prime Minister. Is that the real dynamic going on?
If Britain leaves the EU, there's a couple of different issues here. First of all, it creates a bit of distance between us and TTIP.
So it's Brexit for Corbyn. Vote Brexit, get Corbyn. That's your thinking.
It will also damage the Tory party enormously. It'll cause them a huge amount of damage, which I would be very pleased about.
This isn't about the European Union at all for you.
It's all completely about the European Union. It's all about the European Union, and it's all about having an alternative economic and social system, one that is not based on privatisation, it's not based on cuts, and it's not based on the abuse of human rights. People are talking here about how the European Union has looked after human rights. Let me say this, William. Everybody remembers that child that was washed up on a beach and was in the front pages of all the papers. Under the deal the European Union has just done, that child would be sent back to Syria. That's the reality of the European Union and the European Union approach to human rights. And unfortunately, there's a lot of voices who are saying there's a lot wrong with Europe, but they're not joining us in campaigning to change it, not in real terms.
Does that child's family have more or less of a chance of getting a home, for example, within the United Kingdom, Patricia, if we're out of Europe?
I think much less of a chance. I mean, I do think that we really have to change the disgraceful position that the majority of European countries have taken on their borders. I mean, who are we? We expected the world to open borders to us, and they did. I think it's much more dangerous, and I honestly do think that if the UK did vote for Brexit, it would not be the voice of the people saying we want a left-wing government, as much as I would like that. It would be for all the wrong reasons, and for some very dangerous and very right-wing reasons.
03030 80 55 55. Really enjoying this. Patrick Mulholland and Patricia McKeown. Our phones have gone crazy. People want to talk to you. Let's get as many more as we can on the radio this lunchtime. We'll go next to Kieran. Hi, Kieran. Hello, Kieran.
Yeah.
Go for it, Kieran. You're live.
Oh, yeah, thanks. Yeah, well, many of these employment protections we take for granted, parental leave, equal treatment for agency workers, part-time holidays, these are all underpinned. And we're going to sacrifice this to some big notion of an experiment to see what's going to happen. You know, it's just madness.
All right, thank you very much. Carmel. Hi, Carmel.
Hello. Some of the points have already been raised by your other callers.
That's all right. You can ask a question or make your own point. It's fine. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, well, what I was going to say is Patricia suggested that our workers' rights would be undermined if we left Europe. But at the same time, she also said that we have the worst anti-trade union laws of any area. Now, Europe has not protected us over the last 30 years of the ravages of trade union attacks. And Europe would do nothing to protect us against the proposals by the Tories for an anti-trade union, more anti-trade union laws in the trade union bill. And your other caller mentioned about the protections that we have. But unfortunately, when countries don't like the protections that Europe has given, for example, to agency workers, they just derogate from the regulation. So we actually have, for example, Swedish derogation on protection for agency workers that every country then exploits. So when governments don't like what Europe say, they just derogate from it. So we're not protected in any manner by being part of Europe. And in fact, we have the worst trade union laws, and Europe has not protected us from that. And won't.
All right, I'll put that to Patricia. And someone made the point earlier that Britain has not opted out of the working time directives, which it could have done in some measure, which some people see as an argument for recognising that the British government isn't always out to go to take away workers' rights. But anyway, Patricia, does Europe guarantee more workers' rights than an independent British state would do?
As Carmel knows, rights are won. They're fought for and won. They're not given. There's a floor of rights in Europe that need to be properly secured and enacted. Unions like mine and hers have been trying to do that for many, many years.
The social chapter.
It's the social chapter, but we have a major role to play in making sure that those rights underpinned by Europe are properly implemented. And I have to tell you that there are thousands upon thousands of low-paid workers in jobs here in Northern Ireland who, without their union pursuing those rights all the way to the European Court and back again, would not have those rights, not the least part-time workers.
That's not an argument for Europe, though, is it?
It's an argument for European floor of rights, which is what we have and what we would sacrifice if we walked away. So we have to make our minds up.
A British Bill of Rights, a British Charter for Justice.
We haven't got a British Bill of Rights.
Well, campaign for that instead, then.
We have already given extensive evidence to the UK Commission on a British Bill of Rights, which would made one recommendation. One, give Northern Ireland the Bill of Rights it was promised in the Good Friday Agreement, and the government refused to do that.
Can I say, William, I do welcome the fact that the discussion has moved from where it had started out even a couple of days ago, where you had the argument was essentially that the European Union as it currently exists as a paradise for workers, and to step outside it was a disaster. The reality now is everybody on the left and everybody within the trade union movement is now, broadly speaking, in agreement. The European Union is not working for us. we need to do something about it. And the question is either can you make it work internally, or do you need to leave? And that is a big step forward in the discussion, in my view. Now, I think the argument still...
But you think it's a neoliberal club?
I think it's a neoliberal club.
And Patricia thinks it isn't a neoliberal club.
Oh, no, I don't think it's a neoliberal club. I do not think it's not a neoliberal club.
Well, it's a neoliberal club you want to be in.
Those are the prevailing policies of governments across Europe.
The Bosses' Union.
Not the least the one that's in Westminster.
But then the question is...
We have to change that.
What are the dangers ahead? And I go back to this point on TTIP.
Who knows?
Well, we do know something. We do know that TTIP is coming down the track.
Mystic Meg on the EU debate soon, because everybody's talking about predicting the future. No one has any answers.
Well, TTIP is under discussion at the minute by the European Union.
Yeah, but TTIP's currently in ruins right now in terms of negotiations.
TTIP is in ruins.
30 years to get us to nowhere.
Well, we hope so, because it's been a very powerful
nearly out of time
campaign.
on this, but we'll go to Ian. And it's been, in some measure, a very successful campaign against TTIP, because it is struggling right now. And whether it will even be enacted is a big question.
But there is a problem. If you vote for the European Union, are you then voting for TTIP as well?
Ian, hello.
Hello, good afternoon, Argie.
Welcome in.
One of the bits of information I have heard, I haven't had it confirmed, is that Switzerland enacted a law 2 years ago about quotas for people coming into the country. They were worried about too many people coming into the country. And they haven't enacted the law because Brussels have told them that you can't do that because of the freedom of movement that they have signed up to.
Switzerland?
Switzerland. I'm wondering, is that true or not?
No.
Well,
but I don't think Switzerland's not in the European Union.
It's not in the European Union, so but it does trade with the European Union, and it signs up to some mobility rules, I think, as part of the trade agreement. But I just don't know, Ian, is the answer to that question.
Well, one of the things that we have long campaigned for in the trade union movement is that Europe would be much more stringent about enforcing equality and human rights clauses in all of its trade agreements. It's miserably failing to do so in all sorts of parts of the world, not the least in Palestine and Israel.
The immigration point, William, it's an important point.
Very briefly.
Very, very quickly. There is a problem with immigration when it is poverty that has been moved around the European Union and lower wages. What the union movement should be fighting for is a minimum wage across Europe that no employer can escape from. Trade union rights for every worker in the European Union. All of those things need to be coming about. That's the way you escape from the immigration trap that currently exists.
And certainly when you look at the evidence in Northern Ireland in terms of our economy and the impact of immigration, we've done lots of programmes in this show on that. We have a net benefit of more than £1 billion a year, it would appear, from that immigration. But you don't hear that very often.
But also the crisis that's hitting Europe at the minute isn't immigration. This is about refugees. This is about people fleeing from conflict that we created. And it is a disgrace upon all of us that we have not properly resolved.
The European Union played its part in creating that conflict.
Sorry, I've got time for 3 more calls. Got to keep them brief with brief answers. Paddy first. Hello, Paddy.
How you doing?
Welcome,
I'm
Paddy.
listening here about all of this morning, both on the non show and yours, about these so-called experts. Now, they don't claim to be experts, but they are likely to be knowledgeable. And my concern is the country is so frightened that my worry is a couple of years down the line, we're going to have mass resignations here. When these ones who say getting out is going to be good and it turns out not to be good, are they all going to resign? Because I can tell you that if they do come out and things look better, the Get Out Brigade will be asking the Stay In Brigade, sling your out, boys.
All right, Paddy, thanks very much. I'm not sure. We'll come back in a few years' time and see who's resigned. Hello, Alex.
Hello, I just there's a lot of references made to Greece, and when you hear trade unionists speak up for the Greek people and their way of their economic system, which basically was not to pay their taxes, and yet on the other hand they're telling us that Britain wouldn't need austerity if everybody in Britain paid their taxes. You can't have it both ways. The Greeks overspent and didn't pay their tax, and they got themselves into trouble, and they basically wanted the rest of the EC to bail them out and let them continue on the same way, and Europe refused. Incredibly.
Are you glad we helped them out then, Paddy? Paddy's gone. Sorry, he's called Alex. Sorry, Alex. Alex, he's still there. Are you glad we helped Greece out?
The point is, it's a matter of public record. Greece did not pay their tax. Greece
done everything they could to avoid
All right.
paying
Well,
Thanks, Alex.
let's be fair. It was the rich Greeks, just like the rich British, who didn't pay their tax. No doubt they have joint accounts in Panama. The ordinary people paid their tax, as they always do, and it's the ordinary people who had to do the bailing out.
It's got to be the final call. It's from David. Hello, David.
I just wanted to correct the misleading comments from Patricia McKeown about the Bill of Rights for Northern Ireland. There was never any agreement in the Belfast Agreement to implement a Bill of Rights. There was merely an agreement to consult and consider.
That's absolutely nonsense. You need to go back and read the proper clauses in the agreement.
Sorry, I was one of the Ulster Unionist negotiators to the agreement.
Well, then you need to read what you negotiated.
There was no consensus on implementing a Bill of Rights, and that is why there is no Bill of Rights.
No, that is not the case. The reason there isn't a Bill of Rights is because the British government used the excuse of the political parties here failing to agree, but actually the agreement is not based on consensus.
The agreement was merely to consult and consider.
No, it was not. You need to read the relevant clauses.
Sorry, you're completely wrong and you're misleading.
I am not completely wrong. I spent a year in the Bill of Rights Forum with all political parties and civil society.
You know what the big issue is, David? There should be a Bill of Rights.
Well, there has to be a Bill of Rights that are proper rights and not a charter for terrorists.
Well, there should be a Bill of Rights, and we're so many years on and the politicians still haven't managed to introduce it. It's an absolute disgrace, and you should hang your heads in shame.
And we're talking about health, housing, education, work and a decent level of income.
OK. Thank you very much, David. Former head of the EU Commission in Northern Ireland, Jane Morris. How are you doing, Jane?
Hello. I'm looking forward to getting into this debate, and I'd like to say that I believe that both of your contributors would agree with me. I think that the United Kingdom should stop dragging its feet at the back of the European bus and move into the driving seat where it belongs. Is that not where we should be? Making change in Europe and leading the way for all the others.
Well, what would it mean to be in the driving seat? For example, would that mean being part of the euro?
Well, I would hope you're referring
to... That's a question for Jane.
Sorry.
No, not at all. It means standing alongside the leaders, the Frances and the Germanys, and fighting for change. And we all agree it needs it. And by the way...
Well, David Cameron did try to get some change, Jane. He came back pretty disappointed.
Yes, but with a resounding yes in the referendum, we have the clout in Brussels. We've got more clout in Brussels, and we can make things happen. And by the way, the Northern European countries and the Eastern European countries all want the UK to stay in and lead the way.
Well, unfortunately, Jane, one of the problems is the European Union is very intent on privatising the bus. We would like it to be publicly owned so as we could all be on board and we actually own it and we democratically decide how it operates and what route it goes into the future. I think that would be extremely important. At the minute, it's going all roads and directions apart from the one where the people want to go.
I totally agree, but the problem is you might be causing it to go in reverse. And I think it needs to go forward and it needs to be democratic as it is. If it's not democratic, why do we elect our MEPs every 5 years? Please explain that one.
Can we get a final word from Patricia? Do you want to add to this transport
I think
analogy?
Jane makes a very strong point. I mean, let's face it.
Let's talk about getting the wheels off the bus.
Well, those who want to leave Europe argue how great the UK will be if it's outside. Well, why is it not using that influence to give us the fair, democratic, social Europe we're looking for? That's the position of the majority of the trade union movement across both islands.
Well, the problem is the UK is in the European Union at the minute, and neither are great.
It's because it's been dragging its feet. It's been reluctant all its life.
What are the other 28 countries doing?
But because of the 28 countries, they look up to the UK, and they're waiting for leadership from the UK, and we definitely need
entirely
to be there.
convinced by that.
Jane, lovely to talk to you. Thank you very much. Someone says like herding sheep, but there you are, or cats, more likely. Thank you very much to Patrick Mulholland and to Patricia McKeown. You've given us a great debate today. Lots and lots of people taking part, and people are continuing on Twitter at BBC Talkback. Up next for us, though, if an organ transplant saved your life, would you care that it came from a pig?
It might seem crazy.